Rich kid mocked him. Seconds later, the whole room went silent. The room went dead silent. You could hear the ticking of the antique wall clock, the hum of the air conditioning, even the faint rustling of sheet music pages in the next room. But most of all, you could hear the sting in the voice that had just shattered the calm. "Hey, don't touch that. That's not for you." All eyes turned to the young black boy now frozen beside the piano. He looked like he'd just been caught stealing, though all he had done was brush his fingertips across one of the ivory keys. The sound it made was soft, light, almost too gentle to be heard, but it had been enough to trigger the loudest voice in the room. Marcus stood still, his hand hovering just above the keys. His brown eyes darted toward the boy who had yelled, Ethan. The son of a wealthy CEO, a prodigy in the eyes of the instructors, and a name that was printed in bold on nearly every competition program in the building. Ethan was what the academy called a legacy student. His parents had donated a wing to the school. He had a private instructor who flew in from New York once a month, and from the way he carried himself, he knew it. The grand piano Marcus had approached sat in the corner like a royal throne. It wasn't just any piano, it was a Steinway, polished to perfection, sitting under soft lighting like a display in a museum. Most students weren't even allowed to practice on it unless they had special permission. But Marcus didn't know that. He was new, he was curious, he was in awe, and now he was humiliated. A few other kids snickered. One of them whispered something to another, and they both burst into quiet laughter. They weren't laughing at a joke. They were laughing at Marcus, at his clothes, his shoes, his nervous posture, his skin, at the fact that he thought he could touch something that wasn't for someone like him. Marcus quickly withdrew his hand as if the piano had burned him. He stepped back, his face flushed, his head bowed slightly, not in shame, but in a way that made him look smaller, like he was trying to disappear. His fingers twitched, still aching from the moment they had tasted the keys. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, they said everything. They spoke of frustration and sadness, of not being seen, of trying to belong in a space that constantly reminded him he didn't. And underneath all that, there was something else, something subtle but powerful. A quiet fire, a spark. Marcus hadn't always felt this out of place. Back home, in his small neighborhood, he was known as the kid who could play, who could. He had an old keyboard with 3 broken keys, but that didn't stop him. His mom said he was born with music in his soul. He could listen to a song once and figure it out by ear. He spent hours playing, learning, creating. The keyboard was his escape, his canvas, his voice. But none of that mattered here. At this elite academy, music wasn't just a passion, it was a pedigree. Students wore designer headphones, carried $200 sheet music folders, and casually name-dropped symphonies, like they were pop songs. Marcus didn't have any of that. What he had was raw talent and a dream, but in this moment it felt like neither was enough. The receptionist glanced over her glasses but didn't intervene. The other parents in the room looked uncomfortable yet said nothing. The atmosphere thickened, not with tension, but with silence, the kind of silence that says, "This happens all the time." Ethan turned back to his group, smirking, already forgetting Marcus like he was just background noise. But Marcus didn't forget. He sat down in the corner, hands in his lap, pretending to scroll through his phone. But his mind was racing, not with anger, but with music. A melody was forming, inspired by the moment. It started off slow, hesitant, just like his steps toward that piano. Then it built, bold, layered, determined. He might not have said a word, but one day soon he'd let his fingers do the talking, and when he did, they'd all be listening. The thing about talent? It doesn't always come dressed in luxury. Sometimes it shows up in worn-out sneakers and a second-hand hoodie. Sometimes it comes from a place where people have to make the most out of the very least. That's where Marcus came from, a world far from grand pianos and private lessons, but rich in something even more valuable: hunger. Marcus lived on the south side of town, a neighborhood where ambition was loud, but opportunity was quiet. His parents worked hard. His mother cleaned houses during the day and braided hair in their kitchen at night, while his father did security at a warehouse and picked up shifts as an Uber driver whenever he could. They didn't have a lot, but what they did have, they poured into Marcus. They saw it in him early, something different. When other kids were watching cartoons, Marcus was tapping rhythms on the kitchen table. At age 5, he was clapping out beats he heard on the radio. By 7, he was humming complex melodies. His mom scraped together enough money to buy him a tiny used keyboard from a thrift shop. It was missing a power cord, so Marcus played it with batteries that barely lasted an hour. But to him, it was magic. No one taught Marcus how to play, he taught himself. He found YouTube videos that broke down songs, paused and replayed them until his fingers memorized every move. He borrowed music theory books from the library, even though some of the terms went over his head. He played with feeling, with emotion, like every note was a sentence in a story only he could tell. While other kids went to piano camp in the summer, Marcus practiced in his bedroom with a broken fan and a sticky key in the middle C position. While they posted selfies at music halls, he was taping index cards to his keyboard, writing down chords and progressions. No fancy teacher, no shiny grand piano, just love, grit, and hours of quiet dedication. So when Marcus got the scholarship to the academy, it felt like a miracle. It was the first time he had been told officially that he was good enough, that his talent had value. His parents cried when they got the email. Marcus smiled, but deep down he was nervous. He didn't know if he could fit in. And once he arrived at the academy, those fears multiplied. The school was beautiful. Tall glass windows, marble floors, and pianos in every room. But it wasn't just the space, it was the people. Everyone there came from money. They wore it like perfume. Their confidence was loud, their laughter even louder. Conversations revolved around auditions, competitions, recitals in Europe, and $10,000 violins. Marcus didn't talk much. He didn't want to mention the broken keyboard. He didn't want to explain that his lessons came from free Wi-Fi at the library. Instead, he just observed, listened, watched how they played, paid attention to the way their fingers moved, the structure of their scales, and still some of them treated him like he was invisible. To them, he was the scholarship kid, the one whose parents didn't even come to drop him off because they were busy working, the one who wore the same hoodie every Tuesday, the one who didn't belong near the Steinway. But what they didn't realize, what no one in that room knew, was that Marcus could already play circles around most of them, not because he had better technique or posture, but because he played from somewhere deeper. He didn't just read music, he felt it. And he didn't just perform for applause, he played to breathe. Marcus never thought of himself as better than anyone. He just wanted a chance, a real chance to show what he could do, to speak the language he loved most, the language of music. But in a world where appearances meant everything, it was easy to overlook someone like him, easy to assume that poverty meant inexperience, that struggle meant weakness, that his skin, color, his background, his silence meant he wasn't ready. But Marcus was ready. He had always been ready. All he needed was a moment. And that moment, it was coming sooner than anyone expected. Just when the weight of the moment threatened to bury Marcus, fate tapped on the keys. The laughter still echoed in the air, though it had already begun to fade. Ethan had turned his back, smug in his little moment of dominance. The other kids went back to their phones and idle chatter. The receptionist returned to her computer, pretending nothing had happened. But then, the heavy wooden door to the practice room swung open, and in walked Ms. Dawson, one of the academy's top piano instructors. She was known for her sharp ear, sharper words, and the kind of presence that quieted a room without her having to say much. She paused for a second, sensing the strange energy. "What's going on?" she asked, scanning the room. Her gaze moved, from the kids clustered together to Marcus, who still sat in the corner, quiet, his shoulders stiff, eyes on the floor. Ethan spoke up with an exaggerated shrug. "Nothing really. He was just messing around with the Steinway." There was something in the way he said messing around that dripped with condescension, like Marcus was a toddler who'd wandered into a chemistry lab. Ms. Dawson tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing as she looked at Marcus. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice calm but direct. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct in him wanted to retreat, to avoid the spotlight, the judgment, the possibility of more embarrassment. But then he thought about how Ethan looked at him like he was less, how everyone just accepted it, how no one stood up for him, so he met her gaze and said quietly, "I play a little." A little. Ethan snorted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sure." Ms. Dawson raised an eyebrow, ignoring Ethan completely. "Would you like to show me?" Marcus froze. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't even pressure. It was an opportunity. One that came out of nowhere, like a door creaking open just enough to peek through. He glanced at the piano. That same Steinway he'd been told wasn't for him. The same one that had practically glared at him the moment he stepped near it. This was either going to be the most humiliating minute of his life, or the most defining. His legs felt like concrete as he stood up. Every step toward the piano felt like it took a year. He could feel the weight of every stare in the room, doubt, curiosity, maybe even hope. He sat down carefully, like the bench might vanish if he moved too quickly. Then he placed his hands on the keys. His fingers trembled, his heart pounded. But his mind? It was clear. He thought about his mom's smile every time she heard him play, about his dad standing in the doorway at night listening even after a 14-hour shift. He thought about his tiny keyboard with the chipped buttons and the batteries that always ran out too soon. Then he closed his eyes and played. The first notes floated through the room like a question, soft, delicate, unsure. But then, as his hands settled, the music grew. It blossomed. He didn't play anything from a book. He didn't go for flashy scales or complicated concertos. He played a piece he wrote himself, a mix of blues and classical, layered with a gospel rhythm he'd grown up hearing in church. It was raw, original, and soulful. His fingers moved with purpose, grace, power. The music told a story of a boy who grew up in a noisy apartment, finding silence in the hum of his keyboard. Of dreams built note by note in between homework and helping his mom fold laundry. Of rejection, of doubt, of resilience. Ms. Dawson didn't move. She didn't blink. No one did. Even Ethan, standing with his arms crossed, was still now. No smirk, no snide comment, just stunned silence. When Marcus finished, he didn't even look up at first. He didn't need to. The room told him everything he needed to hear. There was no applause yet, just quiet awe. And in that silence, Marcus knew he had shifted something. The way they saw him, the way they saw talent, the way they understood belonging. He had walked. Ian is the boy who wasn't allowed to touch the piano, but now he was the one who owned it. The final note hung in the air like it didn't want to leave. Marcus sat still, hands resting gently on the keys, breathing slow, heart thundering in his chest. He didn't open his eyes right away. He let the silence settle, let the feeling of the music wrap around him one last time before it drifted into memory. And the room? It was completely still. No giggles, no whispers, not even the usual rustle of someone shifting in their chair. It was as if time had paused out of respect. Ms. Dawson stood there, unmoving. Her arms crossed loosely, eyes slightly widened, jaw clenched but not in anger, in awe. It was a look Marcus had seen on people before, but only in movies. That look someone gives when they've just witnessed something they weren't ready for, something they couldn't explain. And then it happened. A single clap from the receptionist, who had gotten up from behind the desk. She clapped once more, then twice. And suddenly it was like a dam breaking. Applause filled the room. It wasn't polite, awkward clapping. It was genuine, full-throated, "This boy just did something unforgettable" applause. The parents in the waiting room, some of whom had barely noticed Marcus when they first arrived, now looked at him with entirely new eyes. The kids who had giggled earlier were quiet, unsure of how to react. Even Ethan, who had been the loudest of them all, stood frozen, the cocky expression wiped clean from his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His silence said more than any insult ever could. He knew he'd just been outplayed. No, not outplayed. Outclassed. Ms. Dawson slowly walked over to the piano, her heels clicking softly against the tile. She leaned slightly, looking at Marcus with a smile that was both impressed and curious. "What was that piece?" she asked. "I wrote it," Marcus said quietly, finally opening his eyes. "You wrote it?" He nodded. There was a pause. Just a few seconds, but in that pause, something huge shifted. The atmosphere, the mood, the entire way people saw Marcus. She straightened up, her expression more serious now. That was extraordinary. She turned to the room. "I've taught here for 17 years. I've trained students who went on to Juilliard, performed with national symphonies, and traveled the world. But every once in a while, you witness something that reminds you why music matters. And today, right here, we witnessed that." Marcus didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to praise like that. He wasn't used to being seen. It almost felt surreal. Ms. Dawson turned back to him. "Do you take formal lessons?" He shook his head. "Not really, just YouTube and a keyboard at home." She smiled wider. "Well, I think it's time we changed that." She glanced around the room. "Marcus, would you be interested in joining my masterclass program? I usually reserve it for advanced students, but I think you've earned your place." Marcus's mouth parted slightly, unsure if he'd heard her right. His parents had talked about that masterclass like it was something from a dream. It was known as the fast track to success, and it cost more than what his family made in a month. I can't afford it," he said. "You won't have to," Ms. Dawson replied. "This one's on me." For a second, the entire room turned blurry for Marcus. He blinked quickly, trying to hold back the sudden flood of emotion that swelled up behind his eyes. He had come into that room feeling like he didn't belong. But now, he had earned his seat, and not because someone gave it to him, because he took it with talent, passion, and undeniable brilliance. The kids who mocked him didn't laugh again. Not that day. Some of them even approached him later, asking questions about how he learned, if he'd written more music. A few offered awkward compliments. Ethan stayed quiet the whole time, not out of fear but respect, because even he had to admit, he'd never heard anyone play like that. Marcus didn't let the attention go to his head. He just smiled, thanked people, and stayed humble. Because this wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning. He didn't come to the academy to prove people wrong. He came to prove himself right. In the days that followed, the story of Marcus's performance traveled fast. By the end of the week, almost, everyone in the academy had heard about the scholarship kid, who shut the room down with a song he wrote himself. Instructors asked about him in the halls. Older students who never used to look his way started nodding at him in passing. And Marcus? He didn't let any of it change who he was. He still wore the same hoodie, still packed his lunch in foil, still took the bus and walked 3 blocks to save on fare. But now when he walked through the academy doors, he walked a little taller, not because of fame, but because he belonged. Ms. Dawson kept her word. She enrolled Marcus in her master class program, mentored him personally, and introduced him to composers, producers, and musicians from across the city. She even helped him get a refurbished upright piano donated to his home. Nothing fancy, but real keys, full range, and a promise that his music wouldn't be held back by broken parts anymore. And when Marcus sat down to play, something inside him had changed. Not his style, not his sound, his confidence. Because now, when he played, he knew that someone, many someones, were listening. But the real impact of that moment in the waiting room, it wasn't just about Marcus. It was about what he represented. He was proof that greatness doesn't always wear expensive shoes, that you don't need elite connections to create something extraordinary. That talent, when mixed with heart and perseverance, can break through any wall, even the invisible ones. People started noticing things they'd ignored before. Other students on scholarship began to get more attention from instructors. Conversations shifted. People questioned why there weren't more kids like Marcus in the room. And slowly, the atmosphere at the academy began to change. Not overnight. Not completely, but change had started. All because a boy who wasn't supposed to touch the piano sat down and played like his life depended on it. Because in many ways, it did. Back home, Marcus's family celebrated in their own way. His mom cooked his favorite meal, mac and cheese with hot sauce and fried chicken, and hugged him so tight he thought his ribs would crack. His dad told every neighbor on the block. Even his younger sister made a sign that read, "Marcus the Music Legend," and taped it to his bedroom door. But Marcus didn't feel like a legend. He felt like a messenger. He wanted other kids like him to know that their dreams weren't foolish. That even when people laugh or doubt or try to put you in a box, you can still rise. You can still shine. One afternoon, a younger student, another scholarship kid, walked up to Marcus after a group class. He looked nervous, holding a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. "Hey, I wrote a song I've never shown anyone, but I heard what you did and I thought maybe." Marcus smiled. "Let's hear it," he said, clearing a spot next to him on the bench. That moment, two boys sharing a piano, one learning from the other, that was bigger than applause. Bigger than any standing ovation. It was legacy in motion. Marcus didn't need to be famous. He didn't need trophies or headlines. His victory came every time someone realized they were more than what people expected of them. So when people ask, what happened that day at the music academy, when a boy was mocked for touching a piano he supposedly wasn't allowed to, here's the truth. He didn't just touch it, he owned it. He turned a moment of humiliation into a stage. He took their silence and filled it with song, and he reminded everyone in that room and everyone watching from afar that sometimes the most powerful performances don't happen in concert halls. They happen in the quiet corners, when no one expects greatness and it shows up anyway. Marcus didn't ask for approval. He didn't wait for permission. He just played, and the world had no choice but to listen. Stories like his don't just inspire us. They remind us to look beyond the surface, to uplift those who go unseen, and to recognize that talent, drive, and purpose have no dress code. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful truths. Because we've got so many more to tell. This is Black Truths, and we're just getting started.